Welcome to the deep dive. We've got your sources here on the 211 crew, and we're really going to dig into this one for you today.
Yeah, it's a complex topic. We're looking at how this group, described often as a white supremacist prison gang, got started, what they've reportedly done.
And some pretty major incidents tied to them. So our mission really is just to sift through all this info and pull out the key things you need to grasp about the 211 crew.
Exactly. And just to reiterate, we're working from the information provided, documented reports, and activities to build this picture for you. We're analyzing how they're described.
Okay, so let's jump in. The beginning. Looks like 1995. Denver County Jail. That's where the sources say it started.
That seems to be the consensus, yeah. And the spark apparently was a pretty nasty incident. A white inmate, Benjamin Davis, was attacked.
Right. Sources say beaten by a black inmate. And this seems to be well, the catalyst.
It looks that way. The feeling was, or at least the narrative became, that Davis and other white inmates needed to band together for protection, against established Black and Latino gangs already operating inside.
So self-preservation was the initial driver.
That's what the sources suggest, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That initial need for safety maybe laid the groundwork for the ideology that came later, even with its inconsistencies.
And this idea of a unified white front
Yeah.
was meant to deter attacks, basically.
Seems like it. Create a perception of strength.
They first called themselves the 211 Irish Crew. Interesting detail.
It is. But apparently that didn't last long.
No.
The sources say it shifted pretty quickly to just the 211 crew.
Why the change?
Well, it seems they wanted to broaden the base beyond just guys with Irish heritage. Makes sense if you're trying to build numbers, right? Become a bigger force.
Yeah, strategic. And Davis's original co-defendants, they were involved right from the start, too.
That's what the information indicates, yes. They were part of that founding group.
So that name, 211 Crew, what's the significance there? You mentioned gang lore.
Right. The story goes, it's directly linked back to Benjamin Davis and those co-founders. You know how gangs often have names tied to origins or key figures?
Yeah, gives it weight, I guess. This sort of internal history.
Exactly, part of the identity.
Okay, so moving on to ideology, the classification that comes up again and again is white supremacist prison gang. That seems pretty clear-cut in the reports.
It does, and that label seems tied to their early days, the symbols they were using.
Like what?
Well, the sources mention a mix, actually. Irish symbols like shamrocks, but also Nazi stuff, swastikas, sigils, and even Viking symbols, like horns, often seen in tattoos.
Quite a mix. But here's where it gets a bit confusing, for me anyway. Despite that label, the info says there wasn't like an official ban on interracial relationships.
Right, and even mentions members with interracial kids or ties to Black inmates.
So how do you square that? A white supremacist group without that strict rule?
It's definitely a tension point you see sometimes, the stated ideology versus, well, the reality on the ground. Maybe it served a purpose, maybe it shows internal differences, maybe it's just messier than the label suggests.
There's even that quote from Benjamin Davis's father, Israel Davis, saying his son wasn't racist, had black siblings.
Yeah, that adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
But then you flip the coin, and the sources also link 211 crew members to racially motivated murders, specifically of African Americans.
Exactly, and that really muddies the waters on their official stance, or maybe shows a gap between any official stance and violent actions by members. The documented violence points pretty strongly towards racial animosity being present, regardless of those other complexities.
So their actual core beliefs on race remain somewhat unclear despite the label.
Based on these conflicting points in the sources, yeah, it's not straightforward.
Okay, let's talk evolution. The gang didn't stay static. There was a merger, right?
Yes, with other Colorado prison gangs. The Aryan Syndicate is mentioned, and also a group called ANP.
And the sources note this ANP isn't the George Lincoln Rockwell American Nazi Party. It's a different entity.
Correct. An important distinction. These kinds of mergers happen. Gangs consolidate power, absorb rivals, or form alliances.
They even briefly called themselves the Aryan Empire after this merger.
Apparently so. But then they reverted back to 211 Crew. Maybe the original name just had more recognition, more cachet within the system.
In the Aryan Syndicate, just for context, they were another big white supremacist player in the prisons there.
Yes, often rivals, sometimes allies, constantly shifting dynamics for power and control.
All right, so what do? The list of activities linked to the 211 Crew in these sources is, well, it's long.
It is. We're talking murder, weapons trafficking, drugs, kidnapping, domestic violence, robbery, assault.
Pretty much the spectrum of serious organized crime.
Both inside prison and, crucially, outside as well. Their influence extends beyond the walls.
Any specific names stand out as key members besides Davis?
The sources specifically mention a Michael Collins. Not a lot of detail on his exact role, but being named suggests he was significant.
Right, usually means leadership or involvement in something major.
Often, yes.
Which brings us to the incidents. And this one is huge. The assassination of Tom Clements in 2013. He was the head of the Colorado Department of Corrections.
A massive event.
Yeah.
And the details are chilling. The sources lay out how Evan Spencer Ebel, a 211 crew member on parole,
Killed a pizza delivery guy first. Just for his uniform.
yeah, Nathan Leon. Ebel murdered him, apparently, just to get the pizza delivery, disguised the uniform, the pizza box carrier, utterly ruthless.
Just to get access to Clements.
Exactly. He then drove to Clements' home, rang the doorbell, pretending to have a delivery.
And shot him. Right there.
Shot and killed him on his doorstep. The audacity is staggering. Targeting the head of corrections like that.
It sends shockwaves, obviously. Questions immediately about motive, about whether the gang ordered it.
Absolutely. And the aftermath was intense, too. Ebel fled Colorado.
Ended up in Texas, right? Where things got even crazier.
Yeah, the sources describe a high-speed chase, Ebel firing at deputies, crashing his car.
And then a full-on shootout with the authorities there.
He was hit multiple times, eventually died in the hospital. A violent end after a string of violent acts.
Now, initially there was some thought this might be connected to other killings in Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
A DA, Mike McClelland, and a prosecutor, Mark Hassa.
Yes, the timing and the fact they were justice officials raised that possibility. And there was apparently a threatening letter from a Texas Aryan Brotherhood member that fueled that suspicion. Looked like maybe a coordinated attack.
But that connection didn't hold up.
According to the sources, no. Eventually, a former justice of the peace, Eric Williams, was indicted and later convicted for those murders. So the info seems to disconnect the 211 crew from the Texas assassination specifically.
Okay, that's an important clarification. So, dealing with the 211 crew, Colorado prison officials apparently tried something drastic.
Yeah, the sources mentioned they reportedly started banishing known 211 crew leaders, transferring them out of state to prisons across the U.S.
You can see the logic, trying to break up the power structure in Colorado. But does that work? Or does it just spread the problem?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Does it disrupt them effectively? Or does it inadvertently help them establish connections, spread their ideology, and set up shop in new prison systems?
A real dilemma for corrections officials. A tough balancing act.
Definitely illustrates the challenges in managing these groups.
And finally, the fate of the founder, Benjamin Davis.
The sources state he was eventually transferred out of Colorado, too, to the Wyoming prison system.
Wow.
He later died by suicide there.
So the original founder is gone. But like you said, that doesn't necessarily mean the end of the gang.
Rarely does with these established groups. They often outlive their founders.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up for everyone. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the 211 crew, based on the sources?
Well, I think first, you see a group born out of perceived necessity, that initial violence, and the drive for protection in a hostile environment.
Right, starting with that attack on Davis. Then this complex ideology emerges labeled white supremacist, using those symbols, but with these weird contradictions regarding race and relationships sometimes.
Exactly. And alongside that ideology, a clear pattern of serious violent criminal activity, both inside prison walls and out on the streets.
Culminating in just incredibly high-profile violence, like the Clements assassination by Ebel.
That assassination really underscores the potential reach and danger of such groups. And then there's the challenge for authorities about how do you contain this? Do strategies like transferring leaders work, or do they backfire?
Yeah, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? It makes you consider how these prison gangs form, how they shift and change over time, and the sheer difficulty authorities face trying to control their influence, not just in prison, but also when members move between facilities or are released.
It's a persistent problem, the cycle of gang activity, influence spreading. There are no simple solutions. It definitely gives you something to mull over regarding the whole system.